Sophia stared at her bank account balance on her phone screen and finally allowed herself to smile. After 18 months of working extra shifts at the coffee shop, passing up nights out with friends, and selling clothes she no longer wore online, she'd done it. $15,000, enough for her dream European vacation. "I can't believe it's actually happening," she whispered to herself, closing her eyes to picture the cobblestone streets of Rome, the sparkling lights of the Eiffel Tower, and the warm Mediterranean beaches of Barcelona. The trip planning folder on her desk was bursting with printouts, sticky notes, and dog-eared travel guide pages. Sophia had never been the type to splurge on herself, always the responsible one who saved for rainy days. But after her mom's health scare last year, something shifted inside her. Life was too short to keep postponing joy. "You're going to love the little restaurant I found in Florence," she said, looking up at Tom, who was sprawled on her couch scrolling through his phone. They'd been dating for 3 years, since their final year of college. He was supposed to join her for the last week of the trip, meeting her in Paris, the city she dreamed about visiting since she was a little girl watching old movies with her grandmother. Yeah, sounds great," Tom mumbled without looking up. Sophia frowned slightly but pushed away the familiar pang of disappointment. Tom hadn't shown much enthusiasm about her trip planning, but she chalked it up to him being busy with his new job. They'd been a bit distant lately, but what couple didn't go through rough patches? The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur of shopping for comfortable walking shoes, weather-appropriate clothes, and the perfect carry-on bag that would fit everything she needed while keeping her hands free for taking photos. She practiced basic phrases in Italian, French, and Spanish using a language app during her commute to work. At night, she'd fall asleep imagining herself sitting at quaint cafes, writing in her journal, and striking up conversations with locals and fellow travelers. This trip was about more than just seeing famous landmarks. It was about rediscovering the adventurous, confident part of herself that had somehow gotten lost in the routine of adult life. 13 days before her departure, Sophia's phone rang while she was labeling her travel-sized toiletries. It was Tom. His voice sounded strange, tight and formal. "We need to talk. Can I come over?" An hour later, her carefully organized apartment looked just the same, but her world had completely shattered. Tom sat across from her at the kitchen table, his confession still hanging in the air between them. "It's been going on for almost 6 months," he admitted, unable to meet her eyes. "With Liz." Liz, Sophia's friend since their freshman orientation. The person who'd helped her pick out a birthday gift for Tom just 2 months ago. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Tom continued when Sophia remained silent, tears streaming down her face. "We've been trying to find the right time to tell you." "Get out," Sophia finally managed, her voice barely audible. That night, curled up on her bathroom floor after hours of crying, Sophia almost cancelled her flight. What was the point of going on a romantic European adventure alone? Every itinerary item had been planned with the assumption that she'd eventually be sharing the experience with Tom. The thought of wandering foreign cities with this fresh heartbreak seemed impossible. But as the sun rose, casting golden light across her tear-stained face, something hardened inside Sophia. They had taken her trust, her love, her dignity, but they would not take her dream trip too. With shaking hands, she picked up her phone and texted her boss asking for an additional week off. She would leave earlier than planned. She would see every city on her list, eat at every restaurant she'd researched, and she would do it all while rebuilding herself, piece by broken piece. "This trip isn't about escaping," she told her reflection as she washed her face. "It's about finding who I am without him." The woman in the mirror looked exhausted but determined. 3 years with Tom had slowly dimmed something in her eyes, she realized. This journey might just relight that spark. Sophia returned to her travel folder and began reworking her plans, not as half of a couple, but as a woman about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime, completely on her own terms. The day of Sophia's flight arrived with perfect blue skies, the kind that seemed to promise new beginnings. She'd barely slept, a mix of excitement and lingering sadness keeping her tossing and turning all night. But as her taxi pulled up to the airport's departures terminal, a strange calm washed over her. This was happening. She was really doing this. Sophia wheeled her carefully packed suitcase through the sliding glass doors, the cool air conditioning hitting her face as she entered the bustling terminal. All around her, people rushed with purpose, families herding sleepy children, business people clutching coffee cups, couples holding hands. She swallowed hard at that last one and focused on finding her check-in counter. The line moved quickly, and soon Sophia was handing over her passport to a smiling airline employee who wished her a wonderful trip. With boarding pass in hand and her larger bag checked, she headed towards security, mentally going through her carry-on items. The line snaked back and forth between retractable barriers, and Sophia found herself absently people-watching as she waited. That's when she saw them. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks. The man's back was turned, but something about his posture, the way he tilted his head while talking, was painfully familiar. The woman beside him laughed at something he said, her hand resting casually on his arm. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs as the man turned slightly, revealing his profile. Tom, and there was no mistaking the curly hair of the woman next to him. Liz. They stood at a check-in counter, matching suitcases at their feet. Sophia felt like she'd been dunked in ice water. Her fingers went numb around the handle of her carry-on. Miss, please step forward, a security officer called, but Sophia couldn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on the couple, watching as the airline employee handed them their boarding passes. They were traveling somewhere. Together. As if feeling her stare, Tom looked up and locked eyes with Sophia across the terminal. His expression morphed from relaxed happiness to shocked panic in an instant. He nudged Liz, who turned and spotted Sophia too. Instead of looking guilty, Liz whispered something to Tom, and they both hesitated before slowly making their way toward her. Sophia felt rooted to the spot, unable to escape this collision course. Part of her wanted to run through security and disappear into the anonymous safety of the gate area. But a stronger part, the part still raw with betrayal, stood firm. Sophia, hi, Tom said, his voice strained as they approached. We didn't expect to see you here. Clearly, Sophia replied, surprising herself with how steady she sounded despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. Liz at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Your trip wasn't supposed to start until next week, right? Sophia let out a hollow laugh. I rescheduled. Turns out having your boyfriend cheat on you with your friend opens up a lot of free time. An awkward silence fell between them. Tom shifted his weight and cleared his throat. Look, it's not what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you two are going on a trip together. Sophia's eyes dropped to their boarding passes, and her stomach twisted when she saw the destination. Paris? You're going to Paris. The city she'd talked about nonstop. The place she'd dreamed of visiting since childhood. The destination she'd specifically saved to share with Tom. It was booked months ago, Tom mumbled, avoiding her eyes. As a surprise. A surprise, Sophia repeated, the words tasting bitter. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. You've been planning this the whole time I was saving for my trip. All those times I showed you my travel plans. We didn't mean for any of this to happen, Liz cut in. It just did. People moved around them in the busy terminal, completely unaware of the small drama unfolding in their midst. A family with excited children pushed past. A flight announcement echoed overhead. Life continued its normal rhythm while Sophia felt her world tilting again. Miss? Are you coming through security? The officer called again, more impatiently this time. Sophia looked from Tom's guilty face to Liz's uncomfortable one, then down at her boarding pass. She had a choice to make. She could let this ruin her trip, let them steal this dream from her too, or she could walk away and start her journey anyway. She took a deep breath and tightened her grip on her carry-on. I have a plane to catch, she said quietly, turning toward security. Sophia, wait. Tom reached for her arm, his passport still in his hand. Something inside Sophia snapped. Sophia felt a strange calm wash over her, the kind that comes before a storm. The busy airport terminal seemed to fade into background noise as she focused entirely on Tom's face, the face she'd once loved, the face that had lied to her for months. His hand still gripped her arm, and his passport was right there, inches from her fingers. Let go of me, she said quietly. Tom dropped his hand but didn't step back. Sophia, please, let me explain properly. Explain what? How you and Liz planned a romantic trip to Paris while I worked double shifts to save for mine. How you both sat there listening to me talk about my travel plans, knowing you were going to the exact same places together. Sophia's voice remained low, but the intensity in it made both Tom and Liz flinch. A small crowd of curious onlookers had started to gather, sensing the drama unfolding. An elderly woman shook her head sympathetically at Sophia. A young man with headphones removed one earpiece to listen better. It wasn't like that, Liz insisted, adjusting her designer purse on her shoulder. The trip was planned as a work thing originally. We just... Stop, Sophia raised her hand. I don't want to hear any more lies. Sophia's mind flashed back to all those nights she'd spent researching Paris, the hidden cafes, the best time to visit the Eiffel Tower, the tiny bookshop she'd read about where famous writers used to gather. She'd shared every detail with Tom, who had nodded and smiled while secretly planning to experience it all with someone else. You know what the worst part is? Sophia asked, her voice cracking slightly. I actually believed you when you said you couldn't afford to join me for the full trip. I even felt guilty for going without you. Tom had the decency to look ashamed. I messed up. I know that. Messed up? Is that what you call it? Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. You didn't just mess up. You deliberately hurt me. Both of you did. A security officer was watching them now, clearly trying to decide if intervention was necessary. The line behind Sophia had grown, with people craning their necks to see what was holding things up. Miss, we need to keep the line moving, the officer called. Something about the officer's voice, the everyday normalcy of it, made Sophia suddenly aware of where she was and what was happening. This wasn't some movie scene where she could scream and cry and make a huge scene. This was her real life. Her vacation was waiting, her fresh start. She took a deep breath and started to turn away. That's it? You're just going to walk away? Tom asked, sounding almost disappointed that their confrontation was ending. Sophia turned back slowly. What did you expect? That I'd throw a fit? Make a scene? Give you something to laugh about later on your romantic getaway? Liz at least had the good sense to look down at her shoes. No, Tom fumbled for words. I just thought we should clear the air. Clear the air, Sophia repeated flatly. How considerate of you. That's when she noticed Tom was still holding his passport loosely in his hand, almost carelessly, as if flaunting his freedom to travel, to escape, to start new adventures while leaving wreckage behind. Before she could even process what she was doing, Sophia reached out and snatched the passport from his fingers. Sophia, what are you? Tom began, but stopped short when he saw the look in her eyes. It was like watching someone else's hands as Sophia gripped the little blue booklet. Time seemed to slow down. She knew she should stop, knew this wasn't who she was, knew this moment could change everything. But the pain and rage of the past 2 weeks crystallized into this single, reckless action. Enjoy your romantic getaway, she said, her voice eerily calm as she gripped the passport firmly with both hands. The sound of tearing paper cut through the airport noise like a knife. One clean rip right down the middle, through the gold-embossed emblem, through Tom's shocked photo, through every page that would have been stamped in Paris. The two halves of the passport dangled from Sophia's hands as Tom's face transformed from shock to disbelief to anger. Liz gasped and stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. The security officer who had been watching them was already moving forward, speaking urgently into his radio. Other travelers had their phones out, recording the drama. Are you crazy? Tom shouted, reaching for the torn pieces. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Sophia let the passport halves fall from her fingers. As they fluttered to the floor, the magnitude of what she'd just done began to sink in. The storm of satisfaction that had surged through her was already fading, replaced by the first cold drops of reality. The torn halves of Tom's passport had barely touched the ground when 2 airport security officers appeared on either side of Sophia. One of them, a tall woman with a tight bun, gently but firmly took hold of Sophia's elbow. Ma'am, I need you to come with us, she said in a voice that left no room for argument. The reality of what Sophia had done crashed down on her all at once. Around her, dozens of strangers stared openly, some with phones raised, recording her downfall for their social media accounts. Tom was shouting something about pressing charges, while Liz tugged at his arm, trying to quiet him. "My flight," Sophia said weakly, pointing toward the security checkpoint. "I'm going to miss my flight." The male security officer, older with kind eyes that now looked at her with disappointment, shook his head. "I'm afraid that's the least of your concerns right now, ma'am." Sophia felt herself being guided away from the main terminal area. Her legs moved automatically, though they felt like they belonged to someone else. A strange numbness had replaced the fiery rage that had possessed her just moments ago. She glanced back once to see an airport employee already picking up the torn passport pieces, placing them carefully into a plastic bag like evidence at a crime scene. They led her down a bland hallway, away from the noise and energy of the terminal, to a small room with no windows. The walls were pale gray, the furniture utilitarian, a metal table bolted to the floor and 4 chairs. A security camera blinked silently from one corner of the ceiling. "Please have a seat," the female officer instructed, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Someone from airport police will be with you shortly." The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded final to Sophia's ears. She sank into the chair, her carry-on bag still clutched in her hands like a life preserver. Can I call someone?" she asked, her voice small in the quiet room. "After you've spoken with the officer," the woman replied, her tone professional but not unkind. "Destroying a passport is a serious offense." Those words hung in the air as the 2 security personnel took positions by the door. Sophia stared at the scratched surface of the metal table. Serious offense. The phrase echoed in her mind, growing louder with each repetition. 20 minutes crawled by in silence. Sophia's initial numbness gave way to creeping dread. Her carefully planned trip was unraveling with each passing minute. The flight she should be boarding now would leave without her. The hotel in Rome wouldn't hold her reservation if she didn't show up. Everything she'd worked for was slipping away because of one impulsive moment. When the door finally opened, a uniformed airport police officer entered. He was younger than Sophia had expected, maybe in his early 30s, with a clipboard in hand and a serious expression. "Ms. Rivera," he confirmed, looking at his papers before taking a seat across from her. "I'm Officer Chen. Do you understand why you've been detained?" Sophia nodded, finding it difficult to meet his eyes. I destroyed someone's passport." "Not just anyone's passport," Officer Chen corrected. "A government-issued travel document belonging to Thomas Wilson. That's a federal offense." The word federal made Sophia's stomach drop. She'd never been in trouble with the law before, not even a parking ticket. "I didn't think," she admitted, finally looking up. "I was upset and I just reacted." Officer Chen's expression remained neutral as he made notes. "Mr. Wilson has provided a statement. He says you're his ex-girlfriend and that this was an act of revenge. Is that accurate?" Sophia wanted to explain, to tell this stranger about the betrayal, the lies, the weeks of heartbreak, but the words stuck in her throat. What did it matter anyway? None of it justified what she'd done. "Yes," she said simply. "I see." More notes on the clipboard. "And your own passport, please." Sophia's head snapped up. "My passport? Why?" "Standard procedure. We need to document everyone involved in an incident like this." With trembling hands, Sophia reached into her carry-on and pulled out the small blue booklet that represented her ticket to freedom, to new experiences, to healing. She placed it on the table, watching as Officer Chen picked it up. "This will need to be held temporarily while we process your case," he explained, sliding her passport into an envelope. "But without it, I can't." Sophia's voice trailed off as the full implications hit her. Without a passport, there would be no trip at all. No escape, no fresh start. "I understand this is difficult," Officer Chen said, his tone softening slightly. "But actions have consequences, Ms. Rivera." As he continued to explain the potential charges and next steps, Sophia barely heard him. Through the fog of shock and regret, one thought kept circling in her mind. In trying to hurt Tom, she had only succeeded in destroying her own chance at happiness. Sophia spent nearly 3 hours in that small grey room. 3 hours of her life ticking by while her plane took off without her. 3 hours to replay that moment of madness over and over in her mind, wishing desperately she could take it back. Officer Chen had left after the initial questioning, only to return with more forms and a serious-faced woman who introduced herself as a representative from the Department of Homeland Security. The gravity of the situation became clearer with each passing minute. Under normal circumstances, the woman explained in a clipped tone, destruction of passport documents can result in fines up to $2,000 or even jail time, depending on intent. Sophia's throat went dry. Jail time? For one stupid emotional mistake? She thought about calling her parents but couldn't bear the idea of explaining how she'd thrown away everything over a bad breakup. What happens now? Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That depends partly on Mr. Wilson, the woman replied. He has the right to press charges for destruction of government property. As if summoned by his name, there was a knock on the door and Officer Chen stepped out briefly. When he returned, his expression had changed slightly. Mr. Wilson is outside, he said. He's requesting to speak with you before making his decision about charges. Sophia's stomach twisted into knots. The last person she wanted to see right now was Tom, but she was hardly in a position to refuse. She nodded weakly. When Tom walked in, he looked different somehow. The anger from earlier had faded, replaced by something closer to exhaustion. He nodded to the officers, who reluctantly stepped outside after making it clear they'd be right outside the door. You look terrible, Tom said, taking a seat across from her. Despite everything, Sophia almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. Thanks. Being detained by airport security will do that to a person. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. They said you could press charges, Sophia finally said, looking down at her hands. Is that why you're here? To tell me you're going to make sure I go to jail? Tom sighed deeply. No, I'm not pressing charges. Sophia's head snapped up. You're not. Don't get me wrong, what you did was crazy, Tom said, running a hand through his hair. But I don't want to see you in legal trouble. I told them it was an accident, that we were arguing and you grabbed my passport to look at something, and it tore accidentally when I tried to take it back. Sophia stared at him, confused by this unexpected mercy. Why would you do that? Tom was quiet for a moment. Maybe because I know I hurt you. Or maybe because Liz convinced me it was the right thing to do. He gave a small, humorless laugh. Or maybe I just don't want to be tied up dealing with court dates and legal stuff for the next 6 months. Whatever his reasons, Sophia felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. Thank you, she said simply. Don't thank me, Tom replied, standing up. We're even now. I messed up your life, you messed up my trip. Let's just be done with each other, okay? After Tom left, things moved more quickly. Without charges being pressed, Sophia was released with a stern warning and a fine for causing a disturbance in the airport. She was informed that the incident would be noted in her travel record, meaning extra scrutiny for future international travel. But the most painful consequence came when she approached the airline's customer service desk, hoping to book the next available flight to Rome. The sympathetic agent tapped away at her keyboard before delivering the bad news. The next available economy seat isn't until next Thursday, and there would be a rebooking fee of $850 due to the late cancellation. Sophia's heart sank. Next Thursday was a full week away. Her carefully planned itinerary would be impossible now. She'd miss her reservation at that small family-owned hotel in Rome, the walking tour of ancient ruins she prepared for, the cooking class she'd been excited about. Is there anything sooner? She asked desperately. The agent shook her head. I'm sorry, it's peak travel season. Everything's booked solid. Sophia handed over her credit card, wincing as she thought about the extra expense on top of everything else. $850, almost 2 weeks of extra shifts at work, gone in an instant. As she walked away with her new boarding pass, Sophia felt completely drained. Outside the airport windows, the perfect blue sky had turned gray with approaching storm clouds, perfectly matching her mood. She'd need a place to stay for the week, another expense she hadn't planned for. Sophia pulled her suitcase behind her, each step feeling heavier than the last. Karma, it seemed, worked with remarkable efficiency. Sophia dragged herself through the airport exit, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. Outside, raindrops had begun to fall, forcing her to huddle under the small shelter of the pickup area. She pulled out her phone to look for nearby hotels, wincing at the prices. Even the cheapest option would eat further into her travel budget. A taxi pulled up and Sophia reluctantly climbed in, giving the driver the address of the least expensive hotel she could find. As the car pulled away from the curb, she watched the airport grow smaller in the rear window. It felt like watching her dreams shrink into the distance. The hotel turned out to be a bland, beige building near the airport. The kind of place designed for overnight layovers, not for someone stuck in limbo for a week. Sophia checked in with the last of her energy, barely registering the sympathetic smile of the receptionist who noticed her red-rimmed eyes. Her room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the parking lot. Sophia dropped her suitcase by the door and collapsed onto the bed, too exhausted even to cry. She lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since early morning. After washing her face with cold water, Sophia made her way down to the hotel restaurant, a simple space with about a dozen tables. Only 3 were occupied: a family with tired children, a businessman typing on his laptop, and an older man with silver hair sitting alone, reading something on a tablet. Sophia chose a table in the corner and ordered the cheapest item on the menu, a bowl of soup and bread. While waiting, she pulled out her phone and began the depressing task of canceling her Rome reservations. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mind if I join you? I hate eating alone." Sophia looked up to see the silver-haired man standing beside her table, a friendly smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Her first instinct was to politely decline. She wasn't in the mood for company, but something in his grandfatherly demeanor stopped her. "I'm Pete," he said, extending his hand. "Pete Wilson, travel writer for Worldwide Wanderer magazine." "Sophia," she replied, shaking his hand. "Just Sophia, not traveling anywhere, apparently." Pete raised an eyebrow as he took the seat across from her. "Sounds like there's a story there." Maybe it was because he was a stranger she'd never see again, or maybe it was because keeping everything bottled up felt impossible, but Sophia found herself telling Pete the whole complicated mess: the betrayal, the confrontation, the torn passport, and her ruined trip. "So now I'm stuck here for a week," she concluded as her soup arrived, "watching my savings disappear on hotel rooms instead of enjoying Rome." Pete listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he didn't offer platitudes or tell her things would be okay. Instead, he said something unexpected. "You know, this might sound strange, but I think I could use your help." Sophia blinked in surprise. "My help? With what?" "I'm here covering the International Travel Showcase," Pete explained, pulling out a press badge from his pocket. "It's a massive industry event happening this week at the convention center downtown. All the major tourism boards from around the world set up exhibitions to promote their countries. They bring in chefs, artists, musicians. It's essentially a world tour under one roof." Sophia's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Okay, but what does that have to do with me?" "I need an assistant," Pete said. "My usual photographer canceled at the last minute. I need someone to help take notes, capture photos, maybe do some social media posts. The pay is decent, $200 a day plus expenses." Sophia's mind did the quick math. That would more than cover her rebooking fee. "But I'm not a journalist or a photographer," she protested weakly. Pete waved his hand dismissively. "You have a smartphone, right? That's all you need. Plus, you said you researched your trip extensively. That tells me you are detail-oriented and thorough. That's what I'm looking for." For the first time since that morning, Sophia felt a tiny spark of hope. "So I'd be helping you cover this travel event?" "Exactly, and the best part? You'll get to experience bits of Italy, France, and Spain right here. The food, the culture, the music, it's all there. Not the same as being there, of course, but maybe the next best thing." Sophia stared at her soup, considering the unexpected offer. A week ago, she would have dismissed the idea immediately. She wasn't spontaneous, she didn't take risks. But the old Sophia had also never torn up someone's passport in the middle of an airport. "When would you need me to start?" she asked cautiously. Pete's face broke into a wide smile. "How about tomorrow morning at 9? At exactly 9 o'clock a.m. the next morning, Sophia stood in the massive convention center lobby, clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. After a restless night filled with doubts, she decided to take Pete up on his offer. What did she have to lose? Pete spotted her and waved enthusiastically, looking much more professional today in a blazer and press badge. You made it. Ready for an adventure? Sophia managed a small smile. As ready as I'll ever be. What happened next was nothing short of a whirlwind. Pete guided her through the enormous exhibition hall, where countries from around the world had set up elaborate displays to showcase their culture, food, and attractions. First stop, Italy, Pete announced, steering Sophia toward a section where the air smelled of fresh basil and garlic. The Italian Tourism Board had created a mini piazza, complete with a fountain and cafe tables. A chef was demonstrating how to make authentic pasta from scratch. Take some photos, Pete instructed, handing Sophia a professional camera that was much nicer than her phone. And don't be shy, try the samples. Before she knew it, Sophia was learning to roll pasta dough from an Italian chef who laughed at her clumsy attempts but praised her enthusiasm. He pressed a plate of finished pasta into her hands, the tomato sauce rich and fragrant. One bite and Sophia closed her eyes. It wasn't Rome, but the taste transported her nonetheless. The day flew by in a blur of experiences. Sophia took notes while Pete interviewed tourism representatives, snapped photos of colorful displays, and sampled foods from around the world. By afternoon, they reached the French section, where a man was painting miniature Eiffel Towers for visitors to take home. For you, mademoiselle, he said with a flourish, handing Sophia a tiny painting of the Paris skyline at sunset. When you visit the real thing, you will find it even more beautiful. Sophia carefully tucked the painting into her bag, touched by the gesture. Thank you. I will visit someday. For 5 incredible days, Sophia worked alongside Pete, discovering a side of herself she hadn't known existed. She was good at this, talking to strangers, capturing the essence of a place in photographs, finding the interesting stories that Pete could weave into his articles. The money was helpful, but the experience was priceless. On their last day together, they visited the Spanish exhibition, where a flamenco dancer was performing. The woman's face showed such passion, such complete commitment to the moment, that Sophia found herself transfixed. Sometimes, Pete said quietly beside her, the path we plan isn't the path we're meant to take. Sophia nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I've been thinking about that a lot this week. After the showcase ended, Pete took Sophia for a goodbye dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. Over dessert, he handed her an envelope. Your payment, as promised, he said, plus a little bonus. You've been an excellent assistant. Sophia opened the envelope and gasped. It was nearly twice what they'd agreed upon. I can't accept this much, she protested. You've earned it, Pete insisted. And there's something else. He pulled a business card from his wallet. My editor was impressed with your photos. If you're ever interested in doing some freelance travel writing or photography, give her a call. The morning of her rescheduled flight arrived with sunshine streaming through her hotel window. As Sophia packed her suitcase, she realized something had shifted inside her. The heartbreak that had driven her to this point no longer felt so sharp, so all-consuming. At the airport, she moved through security without incident, her newly returned passport safely in hand. As she waited at her gate, Sophia pulled out her phone and scrolled through the hundreds of photos she'd taken during the week, images of foods she'd tasted, people she'd met, beautiful things she'd seen. The gate agent announced boarding would begin soon. Sophia looked up at the departure board and smiled. Her flight to Rome was on time. But instead of the desperate escape she'd originally planned, this trip now felt like something else entirely. A choice, an adventure, a beginning. She wondered briefly about Tom and Liz. Had they enjoyed Paris? Had it lived up to their expectations? Surprisingly, she found she didn't really care anymore. Sophia boarded the plane with a lightness she hadn't felt in months. As the aircraft climbed into the clouds, she opened her journal to a fresh page and began to write. Not about the past, not about heartbreak or revenge or regrets, but about the unexpected paths life takes us on when we're busy making other plans. About how sometimes what looks like karma heading back is actually the universe course correcting, steering us toward where we're meant to be all along.